Thanks for choosing Lift King. Here's an installation video to help you along with your build of your Pro King 8 and XXL. So here's a picture of the basic tools needed to build your lift. I do suggest using an impact gun. It will save you a bunch of time, but if you don't have one, a ratchet is fine as well. Thanks for purchasing your new Lift King. This is a video on how to put together your Pro King 8 and XXL version. When you basically get the unit, this is how it will look. As you notice, the cardboard was on the frame so not to damage the floor. We start to take the crating apart. Be careful when you're doing that not to cause any scratching. Use a 22mm wrench to take the nuts off the posts. And then start to remove the posts. Stand them up in the corners that you need them. And then you'll basically start to take all the guts out of the lift. Your cross beams, all the hardware, the motor, etc. You want to line up your post that has the motor bracket on there, on the side you want the motor to be at. Then you can take your cross beams and lay them down next to the posts. The short rod on the lock is going to be on the motor side. This is your 110 motor, your 220 motor. That's your box of hardware. And you want to take a razor blade and get all the plastic off. And remove your casters and your ramps. You'll need these later. These are your wheel stoppers for the front and back, and also your C-clips for the ramps. This is your lock rod assembly. It will be in 3 pieces. Lay these next to the lift so they're out of the way, but you know where they go. The handle assembly again goes to the motor side. This is your heavy duty jack tray. It is about 80 pounds and quite heavy, so be careful taking it out. Now remove all the plastic from your lift. This is your cross beam. Your hose is in the motor post. You'll want to remove that. And remove all the nuts and bolts from the top cap. So you're going to want to line up your posts with your crossbeam. Then grab a hammer and you're going to tap your poly blocks to make sure they are tight. Spray the inside of your posts with WD-40. And you're going to lift up the cross beam, make sure the locks are facing to the outside where the lock rail is. You're going to drop it in there to the first lock, make sure everybody's comfortable, lift it up, unlock, and lower down to the bottom lock. Rest on the bottom lock. So you're going to take your 19mm wrench and remove the nuts from the Runway, only the top. On the lower ones, you're going to back off the nuts, but leave them in there just so the frame cannot move. It's very important to do this as you don't want anything to fall. Then you're going to grab the Runway, move it about halfway off so it's still secure. It makes it a little bit easier to remove. So once you're both comfortable, this is quite heavy, you need at least 2 people. Then lift off and put onto the ground. Now you're going to remove the nuts from the frame. And this is the reason we had the cardboard on the ground so you don't scratch the ground. Flip the runway over and make sure the rails are pointing towards each other. You can get rid of the cardboard at this point. We're going to do the same thing with the other crossbeam. Lower it in and rest it on the top lock. Again, make sure the locks are to the outside, to the lock rails. Then we're going to bring it down to the bottom lock and rest it on the bottom lock again. Again, make sure the short lock rods are to the motor side. Now we're going to measure and make sure it's 165 inches for the Pro King 8 or 180 for the XXL. You're going to want to move your cross beams and your posts so we can lift directly on there. Point down, there's a double check and measure again to the outside of the cross beams, 165 inches. Then we're going to slide one side on, just hang it over a little bit and make sure the holes are lined up. You're also going to make sure you don't scratch into the cross beams with the extra hardware that's underneath. You're going to go to the other side and pull it on. The other side will drop on. Then we're going to put the top caps back on. Again, reattach to the hardware. Now we need to line up the holes, and these are obviously not in line, so we're going to pick it up and slide it, and pick it up and slide it over to make sure we don't scratch. So you do need to line up your holes. You can do it with a tool or you can do it visually. If you do have a punch, it does make it easier. So these are the wheel blockers. As you'll notice, one is a mushroom shape and one is a square. The mushroom shape is the drop in for the C-clip, and the square one is to be bolted onto the back of the lift. You'll also notice the C-clips there. That's for the front of the lift. So the C-clips attach to the front, and that's what your ramps will attach into. This is your box of hardware. It includes all your casters and all the hardware you need to put the unit together. These are extra safeties if you want to use them. This is your box of hardware. As you'll see, everything is packaged away neatly for you, so it's easy to find what you need. All the different sections of the lift are separated. These are lag bolts. If you do want to bolt your lift down, they do come with the lift. Most people leave them freestanding. And start to take your hardware out. You will need the longer bolt for the C-clip and the shorter bolt for the stop plate. So make sure you have all your locking hardware. So you start to put it together. The best way is to put the nuts through first, or the bolts through first, with your washers. Line it up, and then reach behind and add your lock washers and your nuts onto the back. You're going to do this on all four corners. Make sure you do manually start it as not to cross thread. On the back of the unit, you're going to do the same thing. So line it up and put the stopper plates on. Again, make sure you have all the right hardware. Lock washer and washer, and your nut. Again, manually start it as not to cross thread. So you're going to need a 19 mil wrench and a 3/8 Allen key, and either a ratchet or an impact gun. Put the 19 mil wrench on the nuts and tighten it up. You don't need torque wrenches, just get it till it's tight. As locking hardware. Go around all 4 corners and do the same. Then you're going to go to the top caps, which again are 19 mil. Put all your hardware back in and tighten them up. So you're going to go underneath and you're going to cut the tire wraps, and then you're going to extend the cylinder. To extend the cylinder, you're going to push it out with your feet. It's quite easy to do. The cables are sort of pre-strung for you. So once you've extended the cylinder, you'll start to pull the cables. You're going to need to make sure when you pull the cables out that you are getting onto the pulleys. So take the nuts off. Feed the cable through the runway and onto the pulley. Go around the pulley and then pull it up to the top cap. Then you're going to add your nuts onto the top. Washer first. And the 2 nuts. You're now going to do the same with all 4 cables. Make sure your cables are free and you're feeding through the runway. Again, make sure you are on the pulleys. Very important. Make sure you clear the top cap by a couple of inches. And try to put them on the same distance on all 4 corners. So now we're going to jump over to our hydraulic line underneath the runway. It's already attached to the cylinder for you. The other side, you're going to take the nut off. You're going to push the fitting through the opening and put your nut back on to secure it. Later on, you will be attaching a hose to this. And continue running your cables. Again, feeding through the runway, making sure everything's clear. Going around the pulley and up to the top cap. These are the tools you'll need to put your motor on. 110 plug, which does not come with a unit, and you'll have to purchase one. Carefully take your motor out of the box, not to drop it. It is quite heavy. Now there are 2 different ways to fill up the oil on these units. In this example, we'll remove the reservoir and fill up the reservoir separately. So to do this, you need to remove the 4 bolts from the bottom of the reservoir. Once you remove it, put it to the side. We're going to put the plug on now. So the yellow green is ground. The blue and the brown are the live and the safety on the plug. Most important thing is to make sure your green yellow is to the ground. Make sure your connections are tight. Then go either or. Once you finish your plug, you're going to hang the motor. So you'll have one bag with your hardware for that. Make sure you have your locking hardware and your nuts. Easier if you have one person hold it, another person attach it. If you're by yourself though, you can basically kind of get one nut through and one bolt through, and then from that point on you can let go of it and tighten the rest. The other way of doing this is basically hanging the motor with the reservoir attached, and you can just fill the oil through the filler cap in the front. Either way, you're going to fill the oil up to the angle of the reservoir where it starts to angle, and that will be your full line. You want to use AW32 hydraulic fluid, which you can purchase anywhere. You'll notice on the front the red cap, that is your filler cap if you want to do it the other way. Again, you're going to fill to where the tank starts to angle. There is a fill line on there. And you're going to attach the motor or the reservoir back to the motor and put the 4 screws back into it. Please make sure they are secure, otherwise it will be messy. Tighten up all your nuts and bolts. Now we're going to go to the step of hydraulic hose. So you put a 19mm wrench underneath, and then 19mm on the outside. Just make sure the fitting is secure. And you're going to attach your hose. Make sure you do not cross thread. Do it manually. Once you get it tight, put a wrench underneath so not to move the fitting. And just give it a half turn. You can put your fitting into the motor. Again, tight, but do attach your hose. And a half turn. Green button is power. And we'll start the compressor cylinder, which will start to raise the unit and tighten your cables. You want to look around and make sure all your cables are on the pulleys. If everything's working correctly, your lock should pop in each lock and out on the way up. You're going to take it up to the top lock and rest it down. This is the lowering lever. You push this in, and it'll bring the unit back down to the lock. So at this point, you let go of the lowering lever, and you're going to grab your lock assemblies. You want to remove the nuts from the two outer parts of the assembly. You're going to push them through the cross beam and through the guide on the inside. You are going to need approximately 4 feet on either side of the lift to put these in. Your lift can be moved after. Now you're going to run the center part of the lock assembly again through the guides. And you're going to put the nuts back onto the unit. These are your locking nuts. Roughly 2 inches. You're going to grab your coupling. Attach your coupling to the lock rod. Do the same with the other side. Again, the motor unit, the motor side will have the handle. The far side will have the T. Again, put it through there. Make sure you're going through your guides and put the nuts back on. Now you're going to line up the outer lock arms to the coupling. Again, make sure you're not cross-threading, and you're going to spin the outer part of the lock rod, as you'll see here. And get it to where it's tight. Do the same thing on the other side. You can do this with one person or two. It does help to have 2 people. Now you're going to attach your side lock rods. These are the springs. You also want to make sure the angle of your lock rod handle is the same as shown. These lock rods are adjustable, so if you need to shorten or lengthen them, you can by loosening or tightening. The short lock rod goes to the bottom. Longer lock rod to the top. These will need 10 mil nuts and 10 mil wrenches. This is also a moving piece, so you'll want to get the nuts tight, but do not over tighten them, as they will stop it from moving. Then you're going to go underneath the unit. These are 19 mil nuts. You're going to need 2 wrenches, and you're going to tighten them against themselves. So what you're doing is tighten them against the coupling. And what this does, this keeps the lock rod moving in one piece. When you get to the side, we're going to do the same thing again. The short lock rod goes to the lower, longer to the top. And just make sure your angles are the same on the lock rod. Again, underneath, tighten the other coupling. Make sure there's no movement there. Make sure all your cables are on your pulleys. Have a quick check. Tighten up all your 10mm nuts. So at this point, you're going to want to lift it up. You're going to see the locks. You're going to grab your lock rod handle and you're going to pull down. You're going to look at the locks, look at all the other 4, and make sure they're all disengaging the same way. A big plus on our Lift King units is you can physically see the locks, so you know they're lined up and disengaged when you pull them down. Now as you lower the unit down the first few times here, it's going to push the air out for you. Let it go all the way to the bottom. As it gets to the bottom, keep your hand on the release lever. You're going to notice the oil start to bubble, releasing the air. Keep your hand on it until it's completely stopped. And I want to take the unit back up to the first lock so you can do your casters. So the caster is basically you're just attaching your caster to the frame. And make sure you have your washers and your lock washers. Push them down through the caster frame with the nuts on the inside. This is a 17mm wrench you'll need. These casters are greasable and you should keep them greased on a regular basis for maintenance. These are the pulley covers. So they're one of the last things that go onto the unit, and they're just to cover the pulleys to make sure nothing gets trapped in there. You will find a bag full of hardware. Again, make sure your washers and your lock washers are on. And this is a 14mm wrench. Do the same on all 4 corners. Now for the casters, when they come from the factory, with the thickness of the powder coating, they're a little bit tight. So we usually will take 2 adjustable wrenches and just split them apart a little bit as not to scrape any paint. To attach your casters, you push underneath the pegs and line it up with the holes, and use the pin that they come with to attach. On the other side, there is a cotter pin and a washer that attaches. Attach the cotter pin just to hold it in. You're going to do all 4 corners, then you're going to lower the unit down. And what happens basically is the caster frame will push up on the pegs. They seesaw the posts into the air, and it lifts the unit. If you pull on the cables a little bit, it'll just help it to lift. And then you can start to move your unit around to where your final position will be. It is extremely easy to move. When you're done, lift it up to just below the bottom lock. Pull your pins. You can now put your jack tray in, which slides back and forth along the rails. You can use the tip of jack on to jack your vehicle up. These are the drip trays. It basically stops one vehicle from dripping onto the other. And they just rest on the rails. These are the wheel blockers we mentioned earlier. So they just drop into the C-clips. That's where your ramp attaches to. This is your ramp. As you drive a vehicle on there, you want to make sure your ramp goes into your C-clip. Reason for this is if the car starts to spin out, it cannot pull the ramp off the unit. And there's your new Lift King.